Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. I'm an audiologist and coach. You are on the Steady Coach. I am always excited to bring you success stories, and this one is special for two big reasons. Number one, many of you have read via various medical sources or explicitly been told by medical professionals that you can't recover, that this is a chronic condition that you're only going to be able to manage. And so you ask, hey, is this recovery that I'm going to achieve actually going to last? Or am I just going to be stuck managing this thing? I think this interview is going to answer that question because Allison actually contacted us an entire year ago to let me know she had fully recovered from PPPD. And we waited this year so that you could see that even a year later, Allison is still thriving. The second reason you're going to enjoy this interview is Allison has a way of condensing all of the very complicated topics I often talk about on the channel into a very simple way of understanding things. She did that deliberately. And I think many of you, especially those of you who are newer to my work, are going to find this very easy to understand. And she lays out very specifically what she did to recover. As always, if you enjoy success stories like these, please let me know by leaving questions or comments in the comment section here on YouTube. You can also like, share, and subscribe to my channel. That's really helpful. If you're listening to this as part of a podcast, you can also follow the podcast and leave me a 5-star rating. Again, these things really, really help in my mission to reach as many people as possible with stories of hope like this. Please enjoy this conversation with Allison. Allison, welcome. Thank you so much. And I was just saying before we came on air, I am so excited to finally talk to you because you are hitting an anniversary right now, aren't you?
Yes, my 2-year anniversary since the symptoms started. Yep.
Yes, amazing. Yep.
Yeah.
And not just 2-year anniversary since the symptoms started. Based on when we first heard from you, it's been at least a year since you've recovered. Is that right?
Absolutely. So we touched base about a year ago. I reached out because I had come so far in my recovery, and I really wanted to share that with your viewers because your channel played such an instrumental role in my recovery. So I wanted that opportunity. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here today. But yeah, that was about a year ago, and I have even more to talk about
I
since that
know.
year mark. Yeah.
So excited. This conversation is all about you. So basically, I'm going to try to shut up and let you share all the wisdom that you've acquired. But I just want to say one thing. I have to do a tiny soapbox if it's okay. This week, for some reason, I've just been hearing from people who are getting the message through some credible medical sources that these symptoms are lifelong, that once you have them, you're stuck with them forever. And it is so incredible, the timing to talk to you here, knowing that you've recovered and are still recovered and are living a normal life. And this is not something that is something you're just managing and it's just chronic and it's, it's not that way. That's not correct.
Absolutely not. In fact, I don't like to use the word management. I don't use the word chronic.
Yes.
I hate that word too. And of course, I heard it multiple times throughout my journey, and I'll talk about that. But I think that there is not a lot of positive information out there on the surface, especially from like medical websites.
Yes.
When it comes to neural circuit dizziness or 3PD or, vestibular migraine, whatever you want to call it, that the viewer may be dealing with, there isn't a lot of positivity out there. But if you really dive in, you can find it. And that's where your channel came into play for me. It was really the first resource that gave me so much hope that someone could not only get better, but fully recover from these symptoms.
Preach. Okay. So tell us your story. How did everything get started for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I'll kind of get a little bit into who I am, just
Please.
on a high level. So my name's Allison. I am 37 years old. I live in Tampa, Florida with my husband.
Central Florida.
Absolutely. Yes,
Yes.
I know that you're from Florida as well. So yes, I live in Tampa with my husband and our little fur baby named Bentley. Um, from a professional career standpoint, I have a career in human resources. So my husband and I run a business together, and I handle the human resources aspect of the business. Hobby wise, I love traveling. I'm such an avid traveler. I love makeup. I'm a makeup enthusiast. It's kind of my creative outlet. I love like creating new looks with makeup and playing around with makeup. So, yeah, makeup, traveling. I have amazing friends and family, super close to them. Honestly, on paper, my life looked really good prior to the symptoms starting. And so I'll kind of get into the symptoms and what the initiating event was for that kind of triggered the symptoms. But I think before I get into that, it's important to reflect back on where I was at, not necessarily physically, but mentally prior to the symptoms coming on and prior to that initiating event. So I had just turned 35. So this was 2 years ago. This was in 2023. I had just turned 35 and I was really going through a period of feeling maybe a little bit lost in life, of not really knowing what my next move was. Most of my friends and peer group were starting to have children or had had children or were thinking about having children. And I just wasn't ready to make that commitment yet. So that was always on my mind at the time. And I also had really always defined myself by my professional career and my professional achievements. Um, I'm a I would like to think I'm a pretty high achieving individual, right? And so at the time, I wasn't finding the satisfaction that maybe I once did in my professional career. And so I turned 35. It left me wondering what my next move was. It left with a lot of questions in my mind. So that was on my mind. And I actually at the time was planning a trip to Europe for my husband and I. So I spent a lot of time, I invested a lot of time and effort into that. And we went on the trip, thank goodness, and we had an amazing time. But interestingly enough, about 2 weeks after that is when everything came on, right? And that event happened. And so I just want to tell the viewers, I think it's really important to reflect back on where you're at prior to the symptoms starting. And I've heard quite a few recovery stories, and many times I know sometimes people have big life stressors or like a big life stressor, like maybe they've lost a family member or something big has happened in their life that would make sense why it would start, neural circuit dizziness. For me personally, there really wasn't one big life stressor. It was a compounding effect of many things throughout my life that I had suppressed down through my life experiences and my coping strategies that I had developed, and just where I was at mentally prior to the symptoms starting. So I just wanted to point that out, that you don't necessarily have to have any one big life triggering event to start the symptoms.
Excellent. Thank you for
Yeah,
normalizing that. I think it can be really helpful for people when they can pinpoint one. It's almost a sense of relief when they can,
right.
but so often you can't. And then people end up stressed out, anxious, and confused because they're like, well, wait, if this is caused by stress, I didn't have any stress. Things were going well. Like, what are you talking about?
Right. Well, and that's like I said, my life looked really good on paper, right? At the time, you might look at it from an outsider perspective and think, oh, she doesn't have too many big stressors happening in her life. But if I really reflect back to where I was sitting at mentally, it makes sense. So I'll never forget the day. I've heard a lot of people say this in their recovery stories. When it started, I had on June 1st, 2023, I had a spinning vertigo attack in the middle of the night. It was my first spinning vertigo attack and my last spinning vertigo attack that I've ever had. And I'm not saying that I won't have another one again, but I have not had one since. But it was jarring. I had never experienced anything like this. I remember getting out of bed in the middle of the night, like I sometimes normally do, and the whole room was spinning. I was spinning, the whole room was spinning. It was jarring. And it, in the grand scheme of things, it probably only lasted about, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds. It felt like forever. But the fear lasted so much longer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember going downstairs from my bedroom and just pacing the floor for hours that night, thinking, Can I trigger it again? Is it going to happen again? Is it going to be triggered again? Can I explain what just happened? Can I make it happen? I mean, I probably had almost a mini panic attack at the time, reflecting back on it. So that fear and anxiety level was at an all-time high following that vertigo attack. And so in the days following, obviously the vertigo cleared up. I felt a little off, a little just not myself, but the symptoms weren't chronic at that point. I just knew I didn't feel right. So I did go to my first specialist at that time, and I'll kind of go through at one point all the specialists that I saw because it's quite the list. I went to an ENT. Through my research, I realized I might be dealing with BPPD, right? And so I went to an ENT, and he didn't take a lot of time with me from the beginning. It was kind of an in and out thing, like how fast can I get this girl out of my office is how it felt. And he didn't take a lot of time to ask me about me and about my history. I mean, he got to know what happened with the situation of the vertigo, and he basically did the Epley maneuver and said, it's inconclusive whether you might have had BPPV or not. Yeah. And he said it either is BPPV, meaning like the crystals got knocked off in my ear, tend to cause spinning vertigo attack, or it's vestibular migraine. And
That's helpful.
Yeah, that's helpful, especially for someone that has a lot of health anxiety, to be told you may have a migraine issue. I have never had a migraine in my life, and I remember questioning it from the get-go with him. And I do understand that vestibular migraine, you don't necessarily have to have head pain to be diagnosed with it. But he didn't really get to know me, right? Like, then that was the first thing that made me question this diagnosis. I had no history of migraine. My family has no history of migraine. I have no history of motion sickness as a child. I can read in the car, no problem when it's moving. There's no reason that I should have been diagnosed with a vestibular migraine or given that as a diagnosis early on, or a prognosis, whatever it is that you want to call it. So I remember questioning it, and he said, basically, here's some meclizine. If the Epley maneuver doesn't clear up how you're feeling, go see a balance specialist. And I'm going to refer you to a balance specialist. So I did make an appointment with the balance specialist. It was about 2 weeks out from that appointment with the ENT. And my symptoms, actually, this feeling, I say symptoms, they hadn't become chronic yet, right? Like this off feeling kind of started getting a little bit better. So when I went to the balance specialist, I really was at that moment feeling more like myself again. They did the full array of tests, like, the VNG testing, the rotary chair, the caloric, all of that. All my testing came back normal. And I remember her saying basically the same thing. She agreed that it was either BPPV, or she once again said vestibular migraine. You may be dealing with vestibular migraine. Here's a list of foods to avoid.
Oh,
Yep.
I hate this. Oh, I already hate
Yep.
it. Okay.
Here's a list of foods to avoid. And if it becomes a chronic issue for you, you may need to go see a neurologist and get prescribed drugs for migraine.
Yeah.
And that would be the next step. And that's all I can really help you with. She gave me no other takeaways outside of that. So we're going to the different levels at this point, right, of the health anxiety. And at this point, I was starting to feel a little bit better. And then the symptoms came on, and they came on strong, and they came on daily. And I don't want to say never. The story has a happy ending, but for a very long period of time, I did not feel like myself again after that. So I have a list of my symptoms, if that's okay. And also feel free to stop me at any point if you, okay.
You are way more organized than I am. I can already tell. So I'm just going to let you tell this story. You're doing such a wonderful job. You're such a great communicator. So go for it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So, okay. So the dizziness obviously was the biggest symptom. It was never like a spinning vertigo sensation again. It was more like a disequilibrium. So like a sensation that my body was moving, or, it would depend on the day, moving, floating, like the floor, like maybe more of a non-spinning vertigo, like the floor was moving under me, or my feet were moving when they weren't. Yes. At one point it was really bad. I was being pulled to one side or the other. That cleared up pretty quick. But the internal sway and movement sensation really lasted a long time. I
And
had
was
a
this
lot of,
all day? Like these sensations, were they happening all day no matter what you were doing?
yes, they would fluctuate. Some sensations would be more prevalent than others on certain days, and they would fluctuate maybe between like an 8 to a 10 on
Ooh.
the scale every
Ooh.
day. Yeah, every day. And the dizziness was just a part of it. I had a lot of visual sensations as well. And I had 20/20 vision. I still have 20/20 vision, by the way. It's now come back
That's
completely.
incredible.
Yeah, yeah. So I couldn't see. Everything was blurry. I had a lot of trouble reading. It was almost like like words. My brain couldn't comprehend them. I remember watching TV with my husband, and he loves to watch with subtitles, and I don't mind it. I've gotten used to it at this point, but I had to have him take them off because I couldn't read what was coming up on the screen and also watch in the background what was happening. So I had a lot of problems with that. I had a lot of light sensitivity, which I'd never had in my life before. For some reason, natural lighting was really good, but a lot of that fake lighting, overhead lighting, a lot of light sensitivity to that. I felt I had a lot of trouble looking at screens. I felt overstimulated a lot of the time. So I would go to any busy place, a grocery store, a restaurant, a busy street intersection, and I just felt completely overstimulated. Like my brain couldn't comprehend what was happening with everything
Yes.
at once. Yeah. I know that's a big one for a lot of people. I had pretty severe head pressure too. I had never even had headaches in my life. I had a lot of severe head pressure, and I remember it being on such a physical level. I had my sunglasses on one day, and I was so swollen. My head was so swollen that I couldn't even like get them off. They were making little like imprints in my head on the side because my head actually was physically that swollen at the time. I had intense brain fog. I had probably one of the scariest was this derealization, depersonalization. So this concept of basically like having a physical disconnection from reality where you don't even feel like you're in your body. And it almost is like you're looking through life like a foggy window or a veil almost. And that was really scary. Um and yeah, so I would say those were the majority of my symptoms. I didn't have a lot of ear issues. I at one point had at moments ear fullness feeling, but that went away very early on, and I never really had any other ear issues. It was more visual, a lot of visual, and a
Mhm.
lot of that internal dizziness as well.
Yes.
So those were my symptoms. They were daily. They were on a level of 8 to 10, but they would change, right? They would change from day to day. Like I said, some days they'd be better than others. Some days the visual would be worse. Some days the dizziness would be worse. Um,
Did you drive yourself crazy trying to figure out why one symptom would get worse one day or like trying to figure out what was triggering the various symptoms?
Early on, yes, because I'm one of those people, I want answers for everything,
Yes,
right? Like
absolutely.
in my head, the way I was going to work my way out of it is if I got answers to it. And that was one of the hardest parts about the journey is relinquishing that control over the whole journey, including navigating the medical system. But yeah, I kept a journal at one point of my symptoms in the beginning, but I did it with such intensity. It was like every day I would just write notes and notes of like what my body was going through. I was looking at my body through such like a microscope almost. Every sensation was so heightened and looked at so closely. And I did that for a bit. And the more I got into understanding what was happening, the less and less I did that. And I eventually stopped doing that at all. But yeah, of course I wondered because you're experiencing these extremely jarring symptoms. And for someone who, while I've had health anxiety, never really had many health issues, luckily, you go from feeling like yourself to not ever feeling like yourself again. And you just want an explanation.
Of
So
course. Yeah.
yeah, that was really hard for me to accept and let go of. And I think navigating the medical system was probably one of the hardest parts of my journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I saw 7 specialists throughout a 2-month period of time. I saw two, I have a list right here just to make
Perfect.
sure I don't forget anything. I saw 2 ENTs. I saw an audiologist. I saw that balance specialist. I saw a neurologist, I saw a neuro-ophthalmologist, and I saw a neuro-otologist, which is a neurologist of the ear.
Yes.
And I really got no answers from anyone. From the very beginning, I obviously the word vestibular, right, was mentioned to me. So I was able to kind of start researching into that realm of things. And I think sometimes people go a long time without realizing what it is at all that they're dealing with. So that was good that I heard that, but it was also I was given diagnosis that I probably shouldn't have been. And I really want to talk about for viewers the power of words, the power that words hold, especially from a healthcare professional. There's
Preach. Preach
yes,
it. I know you're going to talk about management. Yep. Yep.
yes,
Please.
they're
Yep.
so important for regulating the nervous system. And when you hear positive affirmations, it helps your nervous system kind of tone down that fear. And when you feel validated and heard, it tones down that fear, it tones down that dysregulation. But when you are hearing things like management, chronic, being given diagnosis that you shouldn't have been, I'll give a story. I was seeing a specialist for something totally unrelated to the dizziness. It was actually something with my mouth that had nothing to do with this that I was seeing prior to this even starting. But I was in an appointment with him and I was telling him the dizziness had just started. The symptoms, the sensations, as I say, had just started about a month prior. And I was telling him, and he actually told me, it sounds like you have MS. It sounds like you have MS.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. And he said, I'm not going to, obviously, like, that's not my realm. And I'm not going to diagnose you, but I know I have a friend with MS and her symptoms are similar to yours. And at the time, he said, you need to see a neurologist. And it's so funny because at the time I already had a neurologist appointment set up to get an MRI done and see my neurologist. But I walked around for 2 weeks between that neurologist appointment and seeing him thinking I had MS. Yeah.
Okay. I have a video actually coming out about why these ideas haven't been adopted more like mainstream. And that's not what I'm actually going to be talking about right now. I think they genuinely don't understand the nocebo and placebo effects and how when they give you messages like that, it changes you at a chemical level. It produces biological changes. And I wonder so often, this is again part of why I keep putting out videos every week and putting all this information on the internet. I wonder sometimes if people weren't given those messages up front, if they would have ever even ended up with chronic symptoms. Like if the doctor had just sat you down on day one and said, great, yep, this looks like you're having, vestibular sensations. What's been going on in your life? Let's talk this through a little bit. I want you to know that that neural circuit or central sensitizations exist, and this is what this means, and these are the things you can do. I wonder if your symptoms would have even become chronic at that point.
I have wondered that same thing. I will tell you, I did a lot of research on my own, and like I said, going on Google and Googling and WebMDing, you're not going to see a lot of positivity.
No.
So I was already in my head about it, but I think that healthcare professionals, like I said, really need to understand the power of their words. And honestly, I saw a lot of specialists and I truly feel like most of them were well-intentioned.
Absolutely.
I really do. I think that neural circuit dizziness, chronic sensations in general are not well understood or studied in the medical community. And I think a lot of people want a quick fix, right? And that's what the medical community is used to. People want a quick fix. They want to get them in and out. They have 20 other patients to see that day. So what can they do to write this off quickly without having to take too much time to understand the heart of what's really going on? So I do think that it's just not fully understood with a lot of healthcare professionals. And by the time I found resources that really understood what was going on, I was so far into well, I don't want to say it was so far into my journey, but the symptoms had developed, right? The
That's
sensations
right.
had developed and set in. So yeah, I mean, I just want to validate how difficult it can be navigating the healthcare system, and how important it is to surround yourself with a positive community, both personally and, with your doctors, and your support system. Luckily, I did have a neurologist who was incredible. Um, I did eventually get my MRI done, and he looked at it and said, "This is one of the healthiest 35-year-old brains I've ever seen." And he validated that for me, right? And said, "There's no structural explanation of what
Bless
is
him.
going on." Yeah.
Yes.
He obviously couldn't give me much more. He did say it could be vestibular migraine. And if you want, I can prescribe you something. But he goes, "I just have this feeling you're going to get better."
Mm.
And that was the first time, right? I had a healthcare professional really validate my, my journey and what I was feeling, but also say, "I know you're feeling so horrible, but I really feel like you're going to improve, but I can't tell you how." Right. And so I realized, okay, I was going to have to figure that out on my own. And that's kind of what set me on this journey. I mean, I went to a few more healthcare professionals just because my vision at one point was so bad. And they all kind of gave me the same runaround. And I at one point was like, okay, I have to accept, I'm not going to find out I'm not going to see anything structurally. And and I've heard multiple people say this. In one way, it's you're so happy, right, that they're not finding anything on that MRI or on that testing, but it can be so disheartening to have no explanation for these jarring symptoms that you're experiencing on a daily basis, and for this feeling of not feeling like yourself any day again. And I had to learn to move forward without maybe receiving a proper official diagnosis, and without receiving that validation from every healthcare professional I saw. So I dove in myself and started researching and doing my own work. But there was a dark time, right, before I got to that point. And I would say at my worst, I kind of split it into a physical aspect and a mental aspect. You'll find a lot of my stories split into the physical and mental. Physically, as I've said, the symptoms were there every day on a level of 8 to 10. They would fluctuate sometimes. I was always moving, is one thing I will say. My safe space was not my house. I wanted to get out and I wanted to move, even in the discomfort. And that was always in my head, my way out. And I'll kind of talk more about this, but that was how I was going to get better, right? And that's how I could kind of suppress the symptoms and push them to the background, and I could keep myself busy. So I was still going to social functions. I just wasn't talking about it. I mean, I would talk about it with my close family and my close friends, but I was just living in the discomfort on a daily basis. And that was really hard to come to terms with this fact of maybe I should not be doing things that I once found so much joy in doing. So that was really the physical side of things, and that was hard. But the mental was so much harder, honestly, for me at least. It was probably more of a mental struggle than a physical struggle. I had to learn to be a little bit vulnerable during this time period, and I had to learn to give up control a little bit and to learn to accept help. My husband was such a pillar of strength for me during this time. And luckily, our wonderful team at work really stepped in, and I said, I got to start making my health a priority. I can't keep working the same way I was before this. That was a personal decision. I could keep working. I could force myself, but I wanted to make this my full-time job of getting better. And I don't recommend that now that I'm to the other side of the journey. But at the time, that's what I wanted. I wanted to make it my full-time job. of getting better. I wanted to be that A+ student because that's who I've always been. And now I realize that the B- attitude is really what's going to get you to that point of recovery and seeing improvement. But I was doing a lot at the time. And so kind of, that was really me. That was really me at my worst. And I said, I can't keep living like this. I got to start looking for resources elsewhere. And this was probably about 2 months after the vertigo attack. I like to give time frames so people know. I just want to validate too for people how difficult it is navigating through life with chronic dizziness and these chronic sensations. It's all encompassing. It's taxing on a mental, physical, emotional level. Yeah, it's something that I didn't get a lot of validation in, and I didn't have people really understand because no one else was going through what I was. So I just want to validate that for people that are listening. It's not easy. It's not easy moving through life with these sensations. So it felt like, I would say at the time, the person who I was before was never going to come back, right? And I wanted her back so badly. I did. I wanted her back so badly. But what I realized now, reflecting back, was, and I didn't see it in the moment, but that same person who I wanted back so badly was the same girl who was so listless in her life prior to the symptoms coming on. She was the same person who had developed such extreme coping strategies through my own life experiences that my nervous system was actually extremely dysregulated even before the symptoms reared their ugly head. And I think once I realized this is when it really started to turn around. And I realized two things can be true at once. And it was, you can mourn the person that you were before the symptoms started or the sensation started. But the second being, you can also embrace the journey as a necessary means for self-improvement and self-development.
Gold, what you just said. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that once I kind of started realizing that, and it's not like it was an overnight, process, but once I started realizing that is when there really was a turning point in my journey.
Yeah.
So,
but you first had to get to the point where you even realized what was going on and what needed to be done. So once you made healing or recovery or getting better your full-time job, what did you start doing?
Yeah. So, and here's what I did. I started researching and I came across your channel. That was the first thing. That was the first thing and the most important part of my journey for getting better. And so I didn't necessarily have a name to what it was, but I knew what my symptoms were, and I started researching recovery with these symptoms. And I got off Google, and I was in social media groups for a bit, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I don't recommend that. Oh, I don't recommend it.
Yep. 0 out of 5. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I said, I need to go elsewhere. So I came across your channel, and it was the first resource that gave me hope that I could recover from these horrible sensations. And it put a name too to what it was that I was dealing with. It gave me that definition that I was looking for. And so it was still a process though, even when I started listening to your channel. And I kind of want to talk about this because I've never really heard anyone talk about this. And I noticed this, this theme when I started listening to your recovery stories. And you have so many, and this was 2 years ago and you still had a lot then, and now you have so many more, and I'm so thankful for that. I needed to know that what the people were dealing with, what they were going through, was similar to what I was going through. So I needed that buy-in. So that was like buy-in number one. And so I noticed myself listening to the first half specifically of your recovery stories. And in the first half, people tend to explain what the symptoms were, all the doctors they saw, what that event was that set them off, where their lives were at, maybe, the diagnosis they were given. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that I was really wanting to listen to all of this. So I would go from one recovery story to the next and really just listen to that first part. And I started noticing this theme every single one of those stories fit into my story, my journey, somewhat, a lot completely, right? But they all had similarities. And so that was like buy-in number one for me, was like, okay, these people are dealing with the same exact symptoms. They have the same exact story. They had the same vertigo attack, whatever it was that I had experienced and that I was experiencing. And so that was my buy-in number one. And so then once I started listening to the first half of all your recovery stories, I started listening to the second half, and I was very interested. How were these people getting better, right? And so that part was much more difficult to understand for me, at least. But I just kept listening, and I started seeing patterns in that as well. And so I realized I can only listen to so many recovery stories before I have to put in the work myself. And so I dove in, and that's what I did. And I started putting in the work. I learned about 3PD or this term 3PD from your channel. And that's kind of the name that I gave what I was dealing with. It made sense to me. I felt like I fit all the criteria. So although I had accepted I don't need a name, that's kind of what I did. And I started doing a lot of research on 3PD, like recovery. So in tandem with listening to your channel, I at the time had started working with a vestibular rehab therapist in Tampa in person. I'd had at one point a ENT recommend that I should do it. And I said, okay, I've already been doing it for a month. I already started doing it. Like, of course I beat them to it, of knowing that's the route that may help. And so I'd already started working with a therapist in person, and she was great. But I started researching a lot of 3PD recovery on your channel, as well as just in general. And I came across another channel that they were VRT specialists, and
Yes.
they specialized in working with 3PD patients. And I reached out. I said, what do I have to lose? I reached out, and they so graciously messaged me back. And I started working in tandem in person with a VRT therapist here. I started working virtually because their work was done virtually with them. And this was the first time I started working with a healthcare professional who really understood 3PD. And she got to know me. She got to know my history. Everything like she needed to know. And at the end of that first session together, I remember her saying, you fit the criteria for 3PD. That's what I would diagnose you as. And I hadn't reached that 3-month mark yet in having chronic symptoms, but I was getting there. It was like 2.5 months. Yeah. She said, that's where this is going. I hate to tell you. And I said, I know already. I already diagnosed myself as this. So I started working with her. I worked with, so my recovery consisted of both physical and mental, right? And so that was the physical aspect, was jumping into VRT. I think it's important, the VRT aspect for people, because it gets you moving. Yes. And for me, I had always been moving, even though it was hard. But I know a lot of people, it's scary. It's so scary when you're feeling those symptoms to be up and moving and getting out of your house and doing all these, balance activities. So it really forces you to do that. But for me personally, it built my confidence up, because I had such a lack of confidence at this point. And it really showed me how resilient I was and how strong I was, and how I would just push myself and even through all the discomfort. And so I worked in person with my VRT therapist for 7 months. I worked virtually with my other one for 3 months. And I'll never forget, at one point, my virtual therapist, her name is Dr. Abby Ross. She said, the best homework that I can give you at this point, because you're doing your homework oh so well, and you're doing it every day, 3 times a day, just like I said, the best homework I can give you is to get out and live your life again. Mm-hmm. And that was impactful for me, right? My own therapist was telling me that's how I was going to recover, was to get out and live my life again. And she'd always supported that I would recover. And so that was really the physical aspect. And so I said, okay, what do I need to do mentally? How do I get myself right mentally? And the mental component was the hardest for me. And at the time, I'm still, listening to all of your recovery stories. I'm listening to a lot of your channel in general of, somatic tracking and all of the tools that you were teaching people about. And I think it's so important early on in your recovery to surround yourself with a positive support system. And that means not just your friends and family, but where you're looking for answers.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
And your channel was that for me. It was that positive support system. And like I said, it was the first one that gave me hope. So avoid the social media groups. That's a huge, huge thing that I would say, because I was in them, and there is I have so much empathy and compassion for the people in those groups, but the people who are in those groups unfortunately haven't recovered. And the people who have recovered have left those groups and or aren't active in them anymore. They're not checking them on a daily basis the way you are early on in your journey. And so when you're at your most vulnerable too early on, and I would say avoid the social media groups, surround yourself with resources and with people that are going to bring that positivity to your life. So I was listening to all of your recovery stories, and I want to point out one of your episodes that was so impactful for me. It was Christy Weepy's episode.
She's awesome. Yeah. I need to have her back. Yeah. It's time for
incredible. And I highly, highly recommend anyone listening to my episode to go and listen to hers if you haven't already.
I'll link it.
If you have, yes, if you have, listen to it again, because I've listened to it 3 times at this point and I've taken something new from it every time. But Christy so beautifully articulated the mind-body connection, because I was having I understood it a bit, but I was still trying to put the pieces together, right? And like her episode on your podcast, she so beautifully articulated that and explained all of the coping strategies that one develops that may make you more susceptible to chronic sensations, including chronic dizziness. And she really explained this process of neuroplasticity and like retraining the brain, how to go about rewiring the brain. So her episode was extremely impactful to me. So I reached out to Christy after I listened to that episode, and she is amazing. And she so graciously messaged me back the same day. I mean, she's incredible. And she's the director of the Better Mind Center. So the fact that she even made time for me that quickly was incredible. And she recommended that I work with one of their pain reprocessing coaches at the Better Mind Center. And I'll talk a lot more about that and working with a coach and a therapist later on.
But this is so great. I didn't know that you'd worked with them. I'm so happy. Yes. Christy deserves all the love. She's just so skilled. She really,
she's incredible. And she's so compassionate. And one thing I loved about her episode too, she's been through this. Right? Like she's been through not only the dizziness, but the chronic pain, all of the chronic sensations. She validated how debilitating the dizziness was. It's jarring. It stops you in your tracks. And I mean, her episode was just incredible. And so she put me in touch with one of their therapists, coaches at the Better Mind Center, and Valentina Matosian. And she's changed my life. Valentina, I still work with her to this day. So this was probably about August. Yeah, shout out. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the work that Valentina and I do together. But this was August of 2023 when this was all happening. It was happening quickly, August, September. So about probably 3 months into my journey. So I was doing that, but I took your course, right? And so, because I said, okay, I need to really understand these tools better. I was listening to your episodes, but I took your course and I wanted to do a deep dive, and it did such a good job of explaining, once again, validating the coping strategies that one develops. And I mean, I fit every box, right? Like I was type A. I am, right? Like type A, I'm a perfectionist. I'm a people pleaser. I have trouble saying no, trouble with setting boundaries. I do have some childhood trauma. Unfortunately, my father passed away when I was quite young. So it made sense. It just clicked. I was like, oh, this makes sense why I have such a dysregulated nervous system, right? And at no fault of my own, our own life experiences is what makes us develop these, I guess, behavioral traits. But like I said, I like to call them coping strategies.
That's what I called them in the episode. I remember very clearly. I was like, I'm not sure we should call these traits. I feel like they're more like strategies people
Yeah,
use.
they are. They're
Yeah.
strategies because we're protecting ourselves, right? We think we're doing
Yes.
ourselves a service. That's where we feel safe. So I took your course. I learned a lot of tools from it, but if it's okay with you, I would love to explain, and I have my notes here with me. What helped me was really understanding neuroplasticity and neural pathways, right? On like an analytical level, and how these tools that I learned from you could help me develop new neural
Please.
pathways. So if it's okay, I would love
Of
to
course.
explain how I understand them so that maybe someone who's listening who might have heard about this but not fully understand it could maybe make that connection. And feel free to interrupt me at any point
Go for
if
it.
I'm
Go
not
for it.
properly explaining it. Okay. So, just a brief overview. Neural pathways are basically these communication networks within the nervous system that transmits signals from the brain to the body. So, in my case, when something like an event happens, right? So, in my case, the vertigo attack happened. My brain was sending signals of dizziness to the body. It's warning you, right? Like you're dizzy, you're going through whatever this event is. And then once the event clears up, for most people, the dizziness or whatever the symptoms are clear up after that. But in some cases, the brain continues sending those dizziness signals to the body, right? And so that then kind of becomes this neural circuit dizziness. And basically, the dizziness is making us fearful, and the fear is making us dizzy. So it's kind of this vicious cycle that we've been trapped in. And I hate to use the word trapped, but it's happening, right?
Of course.
But there's a way out. There's a way out. Because the beauty of neural pathways is that we're always creating or revising or redeveloping neural pathways through the entirety of our lives. So basically, you have to think about it like this. If your brain learned how to create these misfiring signals, it has the ability to unlearn those and or create new ones and compensate for what's happened, right? And so that's what's called neuroplasticity, is the brain's ability to rewire itself, basically. And so that's, once I understood that on that level, I was like, oh, well, this makes sense. Like this is science, right? Like I have the capability within me. I just have to learn the tools in order to move forward with that. And so that's where your course came in. And I just want to talk about some of the tools that were really helpful for me that I learned in your teaching. Somatic tracking obviously was the biggest one, still is the biggest one for me. It was also the hardest for me to learn and come to terms with. So it basically teaches your brain, somatic tracking, to interpret signals through a lens of safety and a lens of neutrality. So being neutral towards the sensations that you're experiencing. And it's like, that seems a bit counterintuitive, right? Because they're so jarring. How do you not ignore them, but how do you interpret them from a lens of safety? How do you tell your body that you're safe and your brain that you're safe? And so this learning about somatic tracking, and I did a lot of your somatic tracking, guided somatic tracking at first, and then I eventually learned how to do it on my own. But it was really, yeah,
So
it was.
to hear that, that's the point. If people like, is it okay if I just do it on my own in the moment? I'm like, that's the point.
Yes.
You don't have to use the meditations forever.
Right. You want to get to the point where it becomes natural,
Yes.
right? It's not necessarily easy, but more natural. And you have
Yes.
the capability to do it on your own. For me to get to that point was acceptance. And acceptance is so key in all of this. And at the time I remember saying, I don't accept this. I can never accept this, because acceptance for me was complete resignation. And that meant that I was fine with feeling like this for the rest of my life. But see, here's the thing. That's not what acceptance is at all. Acceptance, and I learned this through your course and just my own teachings, I guess. Acceptance is just really being present in the here and the now, and being able to be okay in that stillness and not having to control it or change it. It's as simple as that. It's not a forever thing. It's not giving in to this is your future, this is your forever. It's for your right now, and that's okay. And you can sit with that, and you can be okay with that. So somatic tracking was really big for me. I eventually learned, like I said, how to do it on my own. And a lot of, like graded exposure as well, which somatic tracking kind of came into play with that because I was always leaving my house and I was always like forcing myself to go to busy places, but I wasn't really being present in it. I was just working through the discomfort and just to say I did it, just to say I can go grocery shopping and I can get through it. And it was horrible, but I could do it. Right. But I eventually learned about like graded exposure and exposing myself to these situations. And I would, on almost a daily basis, just go to a grocery store, like my local store, Walgreens, whatever it was, and stay in there for 5 minutes and be present in there. I would go in there with no agenda except to be present and to be aware of what was going on with my body and to sit with that. And so, yeah. So that was a really big one for me too. Parasympathetic breathing was very helpful. You would think breathing is a natural thing, but it's never really come naturally for me. I still do parasympathetic breathing on a daily basis just because it's so good for calming the nervous system. That was another big tool I took away that helped me.
Were you using it to fix symptoms? Because I want to put this point out there for people because they're like, okay, wait a second. So what you're saying is when I notice symptoms, I need to parasympathetic breathe them away. And I don't think that's what you're saying.
No, in fact, I mean, at times when the symptoms would come on, I'd say that would ignite, okay, let me start breathing. That would trigger, let me start doing the parasympathetic breathing. But the more I got into it, the more it just became a natural habit that I, started my day with, or maybe in the middle of my walk outside, I would stop and sit in nature and breathe and just be present in that moment. And it had nothing to do eventually with only when the symptoms came up and when they were triggered and needing to like tone that down. I think
practicing being okay with them being toned up. I mean, that was the whole point of the somatic tracking and these exposures you were doing.
Right. And I think I think it's okay to really implement these tools, especially early on when you feel you're at your worst and it's almost like a reactive, okay, I need to meditate. Okay, I need to breathe. I'm really feeling high on the symptoms today. And I think that's pretty natural to want to say, okay, I need to do these tools that I've been given on such an intense level. And I really had to learn to tone down the intensity on the way I applied these tools. And I think that was an important aspect of recovery for me. And just making them like a natural part of my day that had nothing to do with toning the symptoms down, whether they were high or they weren't high that day.
That's it. And you know what? I'm so glad you said that because I'm constantly trying to tell people it's kind of like if you're training for an event, okay, or you're trying to train for like a running event. I always use running as a metaphor, and I don't know why, Allison, because I hate running. But I don't know. That's what always pops in my mind. But so would you just go like run the event on the day of the event? No, you would train your muscles. You would train your cardiovascular system. You would have periods of time where you're practicing your running form or whatever, because then when the events actually come up, you know what to do. You can just implement. So when people try to use parasympathetic breathing, somatic tracking only when symptoms are high, it's like they're asking themselves to run a 5K without ever having trained for it, without any of that being muscle memory or any of that being natural to them. You want to use the tools, just like you said. You want them to be something that you use with or without symptoms, on good days or bad days, at times when they're higher and at times when they're low, so that you have the tool ready when you need it.
Right. And also too, if you're only pulling those tools out when you're feeling very symptomatic and you're doing them with such intensity, they're actually you're not using them in the way that they're meant to be used. You're not training and instilling that safety within the brain, within the nervous system. Your brain is going to connect, if you're only doing it when you're feeling the symptoms at a level 10, oh, well, when you start parasympathetic breathing, that's actually maybe means you're unsafe, right? Because you're doing it when you're feeling so symptomatic.
Exactly. Very excellent point. Yes.
Yeah. So I started developing these as daily habits versus just tools in my toolbox for the bad days. So yeah, that's a lot of what I took from your course. And I listened to every single one of your podcast episodes. And I took a lot from that. I heard you talk about Alan Gordon, and there's a connection between Christy, obviously, Weepy, and Alan Gordon. And I read his book, The Way Out, or I listened to it on Audible. He has, if reading's a problem, which it was for me in the beginning. I listened to it on Audible, and that gave me a lot. I mean, all of this instilled the same, right? The same idea of neuroplasticity, of neural circuit symptoms. He uses chronic pain in his book, and I learned just it's synonymous with chronic dizziness. They're all chronic neural circuit symptoms. So yeah, just insert if you were to read, if a viewer was to read his book, insert dizziness with pain. But that helped me. And at this point I was like, okay, I'm doing a lot of work here, and I'm starting to see results, improvements. One thing I will say about this, for me at least, it's not measurable. It's not overnight measurable. And I think that's important to point out, is if someone is looking to wake up one day and it just to be gone, or a week to pass and to say, oh, I was at a 10 last week and I'm at a 1 this week. That's, unfortunately, I don't want to say that can't happen, but that wasn't my case. And I just want to validate that it's hard. It's hard when results aren't necessarily measurable, especially when you're someone that is so structured.
And the ups and downs are brutal.
Yeah, the ups and downs. And I definitely want to talk about that a little bit. I think the last part for me of my tools in my toolbox that really helped me was the mental health counseling and working with Valentina. And I just want to talk about, I mean, oh man, she's just an incredible person. And she really was the last piece that was part of my journey for me, that transformed my journey. She is trained in PRT, which stands for pain reprocessing therapy. So our work together basically focuses on the brain's response to TMS sensations. So things like pain, dizziness, chronic fatigue, tinnitus, things of that nature, and reprogramming the brain's response to those. So that's what she's trained in. Some of what I have taken away from my time with her, and I still work with her, less and less though on the dizziness, and more just on aspects of life that I want to continue in my self-improvement. But she really, I think the first thing, she made it just such a safe space for me to not only express my emotions, but to feel and sit with them. And I think that's so important in the healing journey. I think it's human nature to suppress a lot of our emotions, and I think a lot of us are taught that we don't need to sit with them, we don't need to feel them. It's maybe not even a safe space. We're not told it's okay to do that. And she made it a really safe space for me to sit and feel through those emotions. I remember a tool that she gave me. I think it's called the emotion sensation wheel, and I still use it. Sometimes it's quite cool. And maybe this is something, you could post for viewers, but it basically ties sensations in the body that you're feeling to an emotion. And for someone early on in my journey, it was hard for me to really pinpoint what I was feeling and sit with that feeling in my body, I guess, and to tie it to an emotion. And that sensation wheel I still go back to sometimes if I have a headache or dizziness, or maybe my skin is flushing, whatever it is, it tends to be tied to certain emotions, and really allows us to understand that connection between what's happening in the body to the brain. And that's really what this is all about, right? That connection of the body to the brain. So that was one thing I really took away in our time together early on. Another thing that I was not good at was showing myself kindness and compassion. And I think that's so important. Probably one of the most important things. And really, when we show ourselves kindness, when we talk to ourselves with kind words, and show compassion, we're promoting safety in the brain, and that and really toning down the nervous system, right? And if we're talking positive to ourselves the same way that we would a family member or a friend or even a small child, or like maybe talking to yourself like you would have as your child self, I think that that was a really huge takeaway that I learned was super important to recovery for me.
And
Um,
emotional awareness is part of that. And it, because you can't really meet yourself where you're at if you don't know where you're at. And emotions are kind of like a compass. They don't, you're not necessarily going to go in that direction, but they tell you some kind of truth about how you're experiencing something. And again, it's
right,
up to you. When you get angry at something, that doesn't mean, oh, I should actually go follow through and like hit this person. But it tells you, hey, one of your needs was just not met or a boundary was crossed. You need that data. You need to have that data in order to be safe. And so it all kind of comes back to safety, right? You
right.
cannot be safe if you don't have access to the data that tells you how you're experiencing something. And you can't be self compassionate if you don't have that data either. So they all tie together.
Right. And I think it ties back to this whole perfectionist mentality and not giving myself any grace. Really, it's like if I wasn't recovering perfectly, then I was failing. And words and how I spoke to myself was so important. Um, not to negate the healing that I had done and the recovery that I had done and all of the work that I was putting in. So that was a really another important part of my work together with her that I still work on. Um, and also too, this concept, she did say something that really stuck with me. There's two types of people, she said, that she tends to work with in this realm of neural circuit sensations. And one is what she called detachment, and they were the people, and just so you know, neither one is good. Neither one of what I'm about to say is good. These people tend to find safety in their homes. They really have trouble forcing themselves to get up and move and get out, and their safe space is their home. As little movement as possible and sitting in the comfort is super important to them. And then there's the second type that is the go 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 type, that for me, the unsafe place was being in my house. Like I had to get out. I was going to work myself out of the dizziness. I was going to work myself. I was, going to move and get myself healed and recovered. And in the process, suppress all of it into the background, right? And keep my mind busy. And she really taught me that relaxation and rest is super important, especially for people that are that latter personality type. And just so people know, you can fluctuate between both those at times in the journey. And like I said, neither one is better than the other, but I was definitely that go, go, go person. And she really taught me that slowing down is something that I really needed to actively work on. And having self care isn't laziness, it is a necessary means for calming the nervous system and listening to your body and what it needs that day. And every day could be different, but being that in tune with your body, that accepting that if I can't get out of my house today or leave my house, or maybe I need to rest during the day or have self care, that was super important for me because I never really allowed myself that prior to this. So that was something that was very important that we worked on together. And kind of the last thing that I want to mention to people is this concept of outcome independence. And I'm
No,
sure,
big time. Yeah,
yeah,
please.
I'm sure that you know so much about this. Kind of have my notes here just because I don't want to misexplain it. But like outcome independence basically means focusing on the process rather than the end result, right? And it means continuing to do the inner work necessary, even with not knowing what that end result is, and having that uncertainty with what that is going to look like. So you're basically taking the emotional attachment out of it, and you're by doing that taking all of that emotion, you're focusing on safety and really promoting safety within the brain. And so that was really hard for me, learning this concept of outcome independence, because I was such a high achiever. And like I said, if I wasn't achieving, if my recovery wasn't measurable, then I felt like I was failing in the beginning. And I really had to learn how to once again accept and just kind of sit with where I was at in that moment while continuing to do that inner work without necessarily having to control what that outcome is going to look like or know what that outcome is going to look like. And I think too, when you do start to practice outcome independence, it starts to allow you to experience joy and happiness and being present in the little moments throughout the journey, even if your life is in a state of discomfort at times. And even if you don't know what that outcome is going to look like, because there's so many things that I would have missed out on during this time if I hadn't practiced outcome independence and really sat with those moments of joy.
Let me make this super concrete for people who are listening. This is why we talk about setting process goals. And it can be as simple. If you're like, there is no way I'm going to feel joy right now. If you're in the thick of it, it's going to feel that way. You can focus on even smaller things that you do have control over that are not related to symptoms. So an example of a process goal, you may say, wow, Allison kind of has a point about this emotional stuff. Okay. So maybe you could set a process goal related to a specific situation that you know brings up a feeling for you. And instead of trying to fix it or escape from it, you can just sit with it. For example, I mean, it can be something that small, or it can be self-compassion is a great one too. You might say, okay, every time I screw up this particular thing, I tend to be a complete jerk to myself. I'm going to practice at those times responding in this way instead. When you set those kinds of goals, first of all, you're doing so many things to promote safety. You're implementing the tools that Allison's already talked about, and those are tools that also help you feel safe too. But you're also giving yourself power. You're giving yourself agency by doing that. When you focus on symptoms, your brain's going to take the time it's going to take to adapt to this thing, which is a terrible, awful thing to think about at the beginning, because it just feels so scary and out of your control. But you don't have direct control over the symptoms. You do have direct control over so many other things. Focus on those things and giving yourself messages of power. That's part of safety. Mm-hmm. And that starts from setting process goals, not outcome goals. Don't track your symptoms and set your goals based on symptoms. Set them based on all the process things that Allison has shared with us in this entire conversation, because they're all amazing.
Thank you. And yeah, I appreciate you. Yeah. Validating that and pointing that out. And I think too, also go easy on yourself, give yourself some grace, because if you aren't speaking kind words to yourself and giving yourself grace, then, I mean, really, how are you promoting that safety? And you're not going to be perfect throughout your journey. You are going to have days where you maybe are really in that negative headspace and you find yourself talking to yourself in that way, or, your mind going down that path. And I think just being aware of it is really the first step.
Huge. Mindfulness.
You don't have to, mindfulness. You don't have to change it right then and there, but the first step is awareness, and give yourself that grace and know that you're not going to be perfect every day.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. I know we're short on time, but we have to cover these last two things.
Okay.
So
okay.
They will kill me if I don't ask about this. They will kill me. What are your thoughts on some of the ups and downs and dips? Because that is huge for people.
Yeah. I had a lot of ups and downs. I just want to point out, healing isn't linear. It's just not. It wasn't for me. And I think for most people, it's not. I had a lot of peaks and valleys during my recovery. And I would find myself going into that negative headspace during the valleys timeframes. And at first I would call them setbacks. And now I reflect back and I call them reminders, right? And it's
I like that.
Yeah, it's a reminder to continue taking care of yourself during the worst times. It's a reminder to not let the bad days negate from all the healing that you have done. And it's basically a reminder to hold on to the fact that you have experienced good days or time frames or moments, days, weeks, I don't know what it is, but you've experienced periods where maybe you felt better. And if you can experience it just that one time, I promise you can experience it again. And so I would really hold on to that during the days of being at my worst or bad days. I had good times too. And I would get back there and I would really remind myself of that.
One
And
little
so,
concrete tool that helps here, this goes right in line with what you're saying. Record yourself a voice memo or even a video when you're having a good day.
yeah.
And then you can like give yourself a pep talk for the bad days. And then you'll have a whole library of those good days. Document, because it's so easy for you to just get in your own head and forget and be like, well, maybe I didn't really actually feel better, or maybe I didn't actually have good days. You need evidence that it will truly be okay. And it truly has been okay before or better.
And I love that tool. And I actually did do that a couple of times. I would record myself and listen back to it. I remember I took that from one of your episodes. But yeah, that's so important because we tend to forget, right? When we're feeling at our worst, and that's totally normal. But yeah, if you do have some sort of memory of it, just hold on to that and listen to that voice note or that journaling that you did on that day or whatever it may be, and hold on to that. And I think too, once again, I'm just going to reiterate, it's so important to surround yourself with a positive support system. I think that during my bad times, my support system got me through it. My husband was such a pillar of strength for me. He validated me. He listened to me. He had empathy for me, right? And he had never experienced this, but even just having that support from him got me through those days. And if you're not getting that support from people in your inner circle, it's okay to let them go during that time period, whether it's that time or maybe, for the foreseeable future. If there's people that are bringing negativity to an already dark situation in your life and dark time, then it's okay to let them go and surround yourself with the people that are going to bring that positivity.
Yeah.
So that's how I got through the peaks and valleys. And so 2 years later, right? Like I'm here. And
that was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I get questions from people like, but they said it's lifelong and can only be managed. So that's why it's so awesome that I'm getting to talk to you a year later after, you've been recovered physically. I love that you divided your recovery into physical and mental, because I think about that too. There are two different trajectories, and sometimes symptoms go before you're done. Like, and that's really important. And then other people are like, okay, I feel like I'm really there mentally and the symptoms are just taking forever. That happens too. So I think a big question on people's minds is going to be, what's life like for you now? Do you still have the symptoms? Have you stayed recovered, in other words?
So I am fully recovered. I consider myself fully recovered. I do not have symptoms 95% of the time. And I'm talking, I had these daily symptoms on a level of 8 to 10 every single day. I now am symptom free almost every single day, and I consider myself fully recovered. I would say there are moments or even maybe a day here and there where I might feel a little bit of the background dizziness. Every other symptom is gone. And I'm going to say this is, I think we tend to forget that we felt these sensations in our body prior to this happening, right? And I do remember that. Like I had days even before this where I would feel off, whether it was mental, physical, dizziness, headache, whatever it was. And I remind myself of that on those moments where I feel that dizziness come up, or a day here and there out of, so many days a year that I don't feel it. I just tell myself, I now have this superpower, right? Like I have this superpower that tells me when my stress bucket is a little bit too high and I need to go easy on myself and I need to relax and I need to really regulate my nervous system and spend time on sitting in my body and seeing what it is that I'm feeling. So that's really how I look at it is I'm recovered. I do. I mean, I know we're running short of time. Would you mind if I just run through everything that I've done
Please.
in
Yes, absolutely. This is super important. Absolutely.
Okay. So since 2 years ago, I have traveled the world. I've been to Asia twice in the last 6 months.
That's awesome.
I went to Japan and Korea back in October. I went to Thailand and Vietnam back in March of a couple months ago. I listened to one of your recovery stories pretty early on, and he was great. And he said really the only thing that he would have trouble doing is maybe getting on a 14-hour flight, right? And I remember listening to this is before I went to Asia, and I thought, oh gosh, I would hate that too. I wouldn't be able to do that. I have now been on 4 14-hour flights in the past 6 months, one of which was 15 and a half hours. It was the longest flight I've ever had in my life. It ended up in me running through the Doha airport from one side to the next and then getting on from a 15 and a half hour flight, then getting on a 6-hour flight after that to get to Bangkok. So I have traveled the world. I went to Tokyo, which is arguably probably the most overstimulating city in the world. There's 37 million people that live there. I work out every single week. It's super important to me. I have no problem getting on a treadmill. I have no problem getting on any moving platform. I will say when I get off the treadmill, sometimes I feel for a tiny moment that movement.
That's normal. That's normal. That happens to me too.
Normal. Completely normal. I felt that even before. And I wanted to validate that to people that maybe try it and feel that. I felt that before this happened.
Normal. Yep.
And guess what? I just have to regulate for a second and then it goes away. So I work out. I started doing Pilates a few months ago and I'm now in like advanced level Pilates classes. I've gone on boats, was a big one. It was pretty scary for me, the first one that I got on, and now I'm completely fine. I went to the Willis Tower in Chicago, which is one of the highest towers in the country. And I got to the 110th floor and the floor is glass. So I was walking on the glass floor on the 110th floor of this tower. I've done that. I walk about 5 miles a day outside when possible. As you know, the Florida weather sometimes doesn't always allow for it, but that was actually a huge tool in my journey. Walking outside was huge for me, and I walk about 5 miles a day outside now.
And for context, folks, like right now in Florida, okay, it is, well, at least where I am, it's 90 degrees and like 80% humidity. It is,
yes.
It's like walking in a freaking tea bag. Okay. So I know some of you are bothered by heat and you're like, oh my gosh, is this just always going to, no, it's not always going to be a thing. And Allison, even though sometimes peak summer, you may not be going for 5 miles, but a lot of other times in the year, even when it's not peak summer, it's still pretty hot and muggy and you'll still be able to do it.
Oh yeah. I initially kind of let that get to me when I was like, oh, this barometric pressure I heard can impact this. This and that. No, I get outside every day that I can. And then I'm currently building a house right now. My husband and I are building a house from the ground up. It's been about a 15-month process and it's involved a lot of in-person meetings, a lot of attention to detail, a lot of going to these showrooms and seeing all these patterns and everything all over the place that's super overstimulating. I wouldn't have been able to do that in the beginning probably. And I'm doing that right now. And I never stopped working. I still work, but I have really decided to put my energy and my time where I find the most positivity right now. And I kind of took a step back from my whole purpose and definition being my professional career. And that was my own want to do that, not the fact that I couldn't work, but I still work. I still have my career. And I'm going to say this, everything that I've done on this list, I didn't do when I would have considered myself fully recovered. I did it before. I did everything on this list before I would have considered myself fully recovered. And I think that is why I was able to get to that point, because I didn't let the fact that my life, I didn't know what it was going to look like, or I didn't know what the outcome was going to be, or that I was uncomfortable sometimes. I didn't let that navigate how I was going to live my life and not have life experiences that are joyful and happiness.
Yes, excellent point. I think when people hear sometimes these recovery stories, there are people who take a lot longer to recover sometimes. Uh, eh, this is not a short process for many people. For some people it is, for some people it's not. And they'll hear, "Oh my gosh, it took you, you've had this for how long? It's taken you how long?" And they're like, "Oh my gosh," because they're still in the like deep early throes of it where it's just awful. You don't, you're not, you are going to be able to live a meaningful, fulfilling, and happy life even before you're fully recovered. And in fact, when you're able to start doing that, just like you say, Allison, that's like a different stage of recovery where you start navigating those things, but from the new perspectives that you've gained during the earlier recovery process, where you start to realize, whoa, I've been treating myself really poorly and I haven't been, you know, living in alignment with my values or whatever it is. That's when you get to start putting it into practice, and that also accelerates your recovery.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, it all just kind of came together for me and it all works together as one big picture. But yeah, I wanted to say that I didn't wait to live my life again. And I'm gonna say it wasn't always easy and it can be scary and overwhelming, but the more I did it, the more I feel like it became natural, right? And the
Yes.
more my recovery started to become measurable and that
Yes.
I saw the outcomes that I was really at one point yearning for so bad.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so yeah. So
Exactly.
yeah, that's where I'm at. There's nothing I can't do. There's nothing I wouldn't try to do at this point.
I could think of no better mic drop moment than that. That's amazing. Wow.
Yes.
This has been so wonderful. Again, I remember uh, hearing your story a year ago and thinking, my gosh, she really already has such a good handle on everything that she's done. And so what a gift to now get to add the additional layer of look at all the things that I've done since then. And I think people are going to get a lot out of this and also hear so much hope in this, knowing that it doesn't just stop there. It gets better and better. And this is not, this is not like I'm going to be stuck just managing this for the rest of my life. Life actually gets better afterwards.
Yeah, it does. And I know this is cliche to say, but I think I'm at a point in my journey where I honestly think the sensations for the eye-opening journey that it put me on.
Mm. Wow.
And yeah, and I think that it was necessary for me to have this happen in order to work towards self-improvement. I mean, it allowed me to really branch out, to take risks, to explore new paths in life. And yeah, and I think that I'm at a point in my journey where I'm very grateful for it. It wasn't always easy, but it really helped me love myself again and find joy and happiness in life.
Wow. I mean, what can I even say to that? That was just incredible. What a, again, thank you so much for being willing to spend all this time with me and for sharing so much wisdom for people to hear. And folks, again, I know you're going to get a lot out of this, but if you have questions or comments for either me or Allison, please feel free to drop them below if you're here on YouTube. Please also like, share, subscribe to my channel. Those things help me reach more people. And I know some of you are actually listening to this as a podcast instead. So if you're doing that, please feel free to follow the podcast and also leave us a 5-star rating. These things also really help me reach more people. So thanks to all of you for listening. Thank you, especially Allison. And we will talk to you soon. Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.